All right, ceramic students, let's take a look at our clay slabs and see if they've dried to leather hard. And I've got a couple different options that we can approach for doing our relief carvings. Okay, so the timing of all of this is pretty important. I want to make sure that I leave the plastic on the slab long enough that it can dry out enough so that my marks will stick and it's not so gummy that it just kind of like gums up the tools. But I don't want to leave it under that plastic too long because then the slab just dries out and it'll get too dry to even carve into. So overnight should probably be about perfect. I've had mine sitting under plastic now overnight, and I know that it's reached leather hard state because when I put my fingers on it, I'm not leaving fingerprints. That's kind of a good indication. I could try to lift it up and see if it's reached that kind of stiffness, but I want to try to keep this thing as flat as possible. If I start to bend the slab, you'll notice that as that thing as it dries out in the future, and especially as it fires, it'll start to kind of return to its bent state. Clay has a bit of a memory like that, especially clay slabs. So if you, like me, used something like this to roll out your slabs with, thanks to these sort of spiraling lines on the outside of the clay tube, I have some lines in my clay slab, and I'd like to start with a little bit of a fresh palette. So I'm going to grab my steel smoothing rib and just kind of smooth that out. Wait, you guys don't have steel smoothing ribs. Can't use that thing. I got to come up with some other tool. Thankfully, we're not using these guys anymore, so just lay the side of like a school ID or a credit card or a library card or something over the clay surface. Anything that's got sort of a straight, soft, flexible metal edge or soft, flexible edge. Metals could be okay. More likely that you've got something plastic in your pocket, and that will do just fine as a smoothing rib moving forward. The nice thing about using plastic is that you can cut it, modify it, sand it a little bit easier than the metal that we had at school. So the very first thing I want to talk about is we're going to be actually imprinting the surface of the clay. So in some ways this is a drawing project, in some ways this is a carving project. One of the maybe easiest ways to think about this is a project that I did with a bunch of third graders the other day. Actually, it was a bunch of kindergartners the other day. I had an example of it in the studio. I literally had some slabs rolled out in the studio space. We all went outside together, found some dried plants, and laid them down onto the clay surface and pressed them into the clay. It's kind of an amazing process to do. You'll kind of be amazed at what the sort of like resolution of the clay is to pick up the detail that's in there. But you know, something really, really delicate, like a few of these things that just came out of my yard today, right? They will pick up that detail really wonderfully. And so if it's something that you want to try, you might find that actually mixing a little bit of this texturing technique is kind of a cool way to sort of pick up detail in your relief carvings. Now, you notice that this is totally embedded into the surface of the clay, and I've got two options at this point. I could carefully try to pick those out of the clay, or I could wait till it dries and then try to pick it out, or I could just leave it in the clay, and when we fire it, we could just do a burnout. I'll do my best to sort of carefully lift this out of the clay to see what I can see what sort of results I can get here and show you the sort of resolution of the clay. Oh yeah, that worked out pretty well. So I'm going to lift this up and out. Now this is a pretty basic way. This is oftentimes one of the ways that young people are introduced to clay because it can be a little tricky to work with, but doing imprints is kind of nice. I mean, look at the resolution of all those teeny tiny little feathers and dings and nicks. Now all of that resolution, all of that clay, all that imprinted image will stick around. So I may come back to this piece and work with some of this other area in here, but what I want you guys to do is not stop at merely taking an imprint of something that already exists, like a texture, but I would like you to do some carving, some relief carving. So I have a second slab rolled out here that I was just going to use for demonstration purposes. And on this slab, we'll actually talk about some other options. The one that I showed as my example earlier in the last video was this relief carving tile. Now, this is a deceptively complex pattern. It's actually sort of interwoven three-piece, three-layer patterns that is more analogous to the way fabric is woven together. What I've done, in case you want to give it a shot, is I've provided you guys in your email with a printout pattern of this guy. What this essentially is, you can kind of see, is it's rows of circles that are all the same exact size, and they're all overlapping in just the right way so that as they overlap, they start to produce these sort of three-sided woven chain link pieces. Now, to make perfect circles in the clay is a really tricky thing. So one of the things that I've done to make that easier is I was trying to think like, okay, what I need a circular object that everybody here should have easy enough access to. Well, you should be able to find something like this around your house. This is a milk bottle cap. If you can find one of these in your home, and the diameter of it is the same size as I've got here, they're pretty standard, pretty universal. I've carefully measured the outside of a milk bottle cap. I used the calipers, I took my measurement, I translated that into my computer software, and produced this template so that each one of the circles that you need to produce is the exact same size as one of these milk bottle caps. So if we're going to come in here and do sort of this repeating circle pattern and do a repeat or do a recarve of the example tile, then I'll lay my example here on top of my clay, sort of roughly find its edges, grab my milk bottle cap, and I suppose if your printer paper is thin enough, you might be able to just lay the cap on the top of the clay and give it a little bit of pressure. My printer paper is a little thicker, so I'm going to go around with a pencil and just sort of draw right about where those circles are. And it's not important that you really press super hard at this point. Instead, you're just trying to sort of make the beginning mark. Now this technique is really handy, but it's because I've actually marked the circles that I've drawn. I can easily see where I've had the pencil and where I haven't had the pencil. Just keep in mind that you'll still have to kind of keep track of it fairly precisely where those circles are and where they aren't. I recommend flowing with the pattern, right? I'm going to flow down vertically through this pattern, and then I'll pull some of that pattern away and show you the light indentations that it's made in the surface of the clay. The reason why I want to make sure that I am only doing this fairly lightly is because some of the lines that I'm drawing I'm obviously going to keep, and some of them I will not. Now, in the video, you should hopefully be able to see the sort of light circles that have shown up in the clay. Then afterwards, I could come in and maybe make those just a little bit more defined with the milk bottle top. And as I work back over each one of these and start to overlap the circles, each one of those sort of tricorn or three-sided chain links will start to appear inside. Now, if you're interested in trying this one, I've provided this template via email for you, and as long as when you print it, you click do not scale or do not change size or print full size, it should give you that same size piece. So I'll continue working through this guy and show you a few more examples. Something else though, if you're not excited about working with just sort of a simplistic pattern, you could use some text, right? Text is really interesting patterns. Here's one that's appropriate, right, for our current quarantine status, the stay-at-home policy. So how do we work with this text similarly? Well, text that's been drawn in sort of like a block form or a bubble form that lays on top of each other with kind of like a foreground, middle ground, background would work really well for this. As you're carving in, imagine kind of creating that illusion like I've done here in the template that some letters go behind or underneath others. What I would do if you're interested in this kind of work is start with a pencil and just draw a letter that you would like to draw, right? There's a T, and let's just say I want an E to be somewhere, sitting on top of it. I'd recommend just sort of drawing them in place first, get them roughly in the right position, and then fill in the block lettering around it with a pencil. Okay, and now I have to decide which letter is in front of the other. I kind of want the T to be in front of the E, so when I come in with a Sharpie, and it really could just be a darker pencil for that matter, I want to make sure that I draw in the front letters first because they're not going to be obscured by anything. And that background E, I just don't want the lines to pass through it. Anywhere that that T covers up the E, I'll stop right at the edge. And as long as you stay true to your pencil drawings, you should have something that looks fairly nice. Now, as we're carving it, you'll actually start to kind of get a little bit more of sort of a three-dimensional, or what you might call an extruded lip to it, right? So in the case of the E and the T here, these are all made with really straight lines, so it's fairly easy to kind of come in and give the drawing the feel already that it's starting to push off the page. But I encourage you actually, that might be a really fun way to work with the clay. I could totally imagine this a tile piece that's really carved out. Now the last example I'll show you is actually kind of a goofy one. I was doing some drawings with my daughter last year, right? And I drew this, made this drawing, right, of this kind of like slowly accumulating pile of rubble, right? And then it's clearly like under the water line, and then this building houses up, right? So I've got this giant pile of rubble. And after making the drawing, I thought, that would be kind of an interesting sculpture to approach. You know, all these intricately overlapping boards or, you know, building materials, whatever. So I made this one, and I had it sitting out in the studio before we left school as well. So one of the things that you could do, if you're so inclined, right, if you have that kind of illustrative skill, would be to transform one of your drawings into a relief tile, sort of halfway between a drawing and a sculpture. Really, that's what I love about this carving technique. So I'm excited to see which technique you guys choose, and I will help you walk through that in our one-on-one voice chat meetings.